Welcome back, everybody. In this episode, we speak with Beckton Peddy, the founder of Politix.tv. Now, usually we don't talk politics on this show, but having an entrepreneur on here like Beckton, who is so educated in politics, we had to take the opportunity, especially right before the election here in November of 2024. It was fascinating for us. And Politix.tv is Beckton and his partner's attempt to build a company in order to fight the partisan polarization that's been happening and the misinformation and the declining of, public trust in institutions. Beckton and his partners are trying to take an alternative approach to create a company where the free sharing of information and ideas and political discourse can happen without any kind of craziness attached to it. So I think it's a very important thing what he's doing, and you guys should give this a listen. Beckton, welcome to the Lion's Den.
Thank you, Nico. I appreciate you having me on here.
Yeah, for sure. So really interested to talk to you today. Today is November 1st. We have an election coming up, I guess 4 days from now. And so I'm going to try to actually get this episode out like the day before the election, hopefully. And, usually we don't talk politics on here. Usually we talk entrepreneurship, but we are grateful to have an entrepreneur in Beckton on here who has actually founded a business that is sort of centered around politics. So Beckton, could you tell us a little bit about Politix.tv?
Sure. And yeah, with the election 4 days from now, there's never been a more more current time to talk about it. So, what we're really doing at Politics is building the next generation of political engagement and discussion through live streaming. Politics is a really unique subject matter, and research has shown that it requires special tools and features to promote a healthy conversation. And live streaming is the most engaging method of communicating about it. So, our mission is to improve the political conversation, reduce political partisanship, which is a huge issue in the US right now and is contributing to a lot of problems, and frankly, make discussing politics enjoyable and fun again because it's become too much on the other side of that.
Got it. Okay. And we're definitely going to dive into the partisanship and all the issues and all that stuff. So how exactly does Politix.tv work then? Is it like anybody can go on and set up their own live stream channel, or do you have to be like vetted before you are awarded with a channel, or how does the makeup of it all work?
Yeah, so a really simple analogy is we're very similar to like Twitch.tv, how they focus on the gaming niche, but for politics. And one of the issues we struggled with in coming up with politics was how do we ensure the quality of the site, while still allowing people to express their views. So right now we're operating under a closed beta system where we vet the people that come on, and we focus on small up and coming creators who are really smart and potentially have a unique take on something that's going on in politics. And to ensure the quality, we're only letting streamers on that we choose and vet at the minute. And we're trying to promote a balanced dialogue among all sides. I think we actually have a lot of work to do before we can open this up to a large population in the future. There's a lot of issues with that as far as, making sure your platform is open yet has a healthy and productive conversation. And that's actually maybe one of the biggest challenges we'll face in the future.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that challenge rear its ugly head on basically every platform that exists right now, which is probably the cause of a lot of the polarization that we'll talk about. So with you, founding this business, growing this business, I always, when I have entrepreneurs on here, I like to hear about challenges that they had during the founding of their business. I mean, have you run into anything crazy in the early days of founding and growing this thing?
Yeah, we've run into so many things. If I were to talk about all of them, we might be here for another hour or two. But I think probably the biggest lesson we learned, and we learned this kind of hard, and we learned it quite early, was the perils of outsourcing. And outsourcing can be a great thing. It can really reduce your amount of capital expenditures, and you can get a very comparable amount of work from at a much lower cost and at a greater efficiency than you would from somebody in the US. So we outsourced our initial development of the platform, both the desktop and the mobile site. And it's even more unfortunate because we had some developers that we hired that were actually vetted through a friend. They did some work for him and they did really good work on their site. But I think what happened was, in general, the complexity was underestimated by them. And, they made promises that they potentially couldn't keep. So it really ended up being kind of a disaster for us. We spent a lot of money with them, and we ended up being able to use very little of their code in the end, which set us
Mm,
back about 6 months. But I like to see this as our fault because we should have cut them out earlier. We should have been a little more proactive and making sure that everything was going perfectly. And I learned that if you're going to outsource, you need to have people that are both really amazing, and you have to manage them more potentially than you would have to manage somebody in your home country. So we've learned a lot from that, and luckily it didn't actually sink the company or cause any issue or cause any major issues. We're doing well now. But I think for aspiring founders that think, oh, I can go outsource all my development to just anybody, and get this done at a much cheaper price, and it's going to be exactly the same. I would say buyer beware. Not necessarily not to do it, but make sure that you hire the right people. I would say for sure that one thing the guys we worked with were lacking was a real product manager on their side, right? They don't have to be full time, but somebody part time who lives in the U.S. or Europe or somewhere that's actually managing the outsourced people on their end, and so you don't have to do all of that and try to work across time zones and language barriers is
mhm.
extremely helpful and probably a requirement for us going forward.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, definitely in the early days of running a business, it's usually a good idea to keep everything as close to the chest as possible. And then as the business starts to grow, you can sort of let go of things a little bit more once you're seeing some success. But yeah, I've had the same experience. It's like in the early days, almost all of the work needs to be done by founders, people who are like extremely passionate and incentivized to do it well. And so you can definitely run into trouble. Okay.
Oh
But now
yeah,
you're yeah, but now you're up and running and everything's good and you're moving forward. So that sounds good.
yeah. Those issues were long in the past. We have a great team now. Our two development, the two people that work with us in development, they're actually friends of mine. They went to school with me. They're amazing, awesome guys. They're getting the same amount of work done that a team of four outsourced guys are getting done. And not only is it fun to work with people that I consider myself lucky in that case, but everything works so much more smoothly because the one thing I didn't mention is the time difference can be a big factor, right? If you're working with somebody in Eastern Europe or India, you might think, oh, well, I can meet with them and, when our time zones intersect at the end of each day. But if you're not able to really follow them throughout what's going on and when they need things, as they need things instantly, that can cause a lot of headaches and delays as well.
Yeah. So let's talk about maybe some of the challenges within the U.S. political system right now, and or maybe within public society and how they view the U.S. political system, or the intersection of all of that. I don't know. It just seems like right now it's such a mess. Like I don't. I think a lot of people out there like don't know what's true. They're angry. They don't really know why, and it just seems crazy. So maybe let's just start with polarization as a good way to enter into this conversation, because I know that was like a huge driver for you guys in starting this company, right?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, mess is probably the best way to describe what's currently going on in US politics right now. And I'm optimistic about the future, but polarization is probably the biggest issue facing us right now, right? The divide between right and left just getting ever growing larger and larger. And yeah, even though politics came from a personal, it initially started from a personal goal to find a good community and talk to people we liked. Upon being getting more into it, we realized like, wow, this is not only a way to make it more enjoyable for everyday people. We actually have the opportunity to do something big here and to help improve the political conversation in society. And I'm sure all of you and all your listeners have heard all the research, right? Political polarization is at an all-time high. People's optimism about the future of the country is at an all-time low. Everybody seems to think it's going the wrong way, and it's not only causing issues just among the talking heads on TV, but it's causing issues in the real world too. We're seeing increasing incidents of political violence, both reported widely in media and small among neighbors and disputes. And it's actually it tears apart friendships. It can tear apart relationships. Excuse me. So it's a big problem, and it extends way beyond just the election and the conversation 6 months leading up to it. And frankly, I think it's actually one of the biggest dangers to American society going forward. If we can't figure out how to not necessarily fix it, but at least bring people a little more closer and bring the dialogue back together. I see a lot of issues for the country, for this country in the few decades ahead.
Yeah, I agree. So I think it's fairly well understood at this point that a lot of the polarization, which has increased in the past, decade, 15 years, whatever, you can sort of, tie it back to, for the most part, social media algorithms, which are, basically written in order to maximize likes, engagement, whatever. And those algorithms algorithmically realized that the craziest, anger producing sorts of content are the things that get the highest engagement. And so they sort of just automatically put that crazy anger inducing type of stuff out there. And so that's what a lot of people see when they're on social media. Then I think probably the news media, just normal legacy news channels, also started to go down that same path of, how do we get higher engagement? And so they started to try to be a little bit more radical in what they were saying in order to get higher engagement. And all of this has just created an environment where all of the, so much of the media, we won't say all, but so much of the media, you're just hearing these crazy things, and it drives you crazy, and it leads to polarization when you've got one side of crazy things and a completely opposite side of crazy things. And it's like, which crazy side do you fall on? I mean, so this to me makes sense of how this all kind of happened. Are you on the same page with that? Am I missing anything about this diagnosis?
Well, I think you hit the nail right on the head. It's almost becomes like a toxic feedback cycle, and really loops and just continues getting more vicious and vicious. The only thing I would say is that this, at least from, our research, we think this actually started in like the mid 2000s when, clickbait content and the internet was really growing up. Clickbait content became a big thing. At first it was like, oh, see this cool new controversial cupcake recipe on Facebook. I'm generalizing, but not too far off. And when the social media platforms came around, you're right. They use this kind of top-down algorithmic method where content that gets the most views is more likely to be promoted and seen by even more people. And so it kind of stratifies content, right? You have this most viewed content that keeps getting more and more views, going up and up and up. And you have all the other content that's kind of down at this base level. And that causes problems because, as you said, the content that's most likely to be viewed by people on these short, quick, bite-sized places like TikTok and X and Instagram is the controversial, headline-grabbing, kind of content. And you're right that some people might say, well, how does this cause polarization if, you can decide to not view it all the time? Well, social media is used by 3/4 of all people on a monthly basis in the US at least, and some form of social media. And so when everybody in the US is constantly exposed to these, algorithmically driven, feedback cycles of the most shock value and controversial content, you're right. This creates, it literally breeds partisanship on its own. And it's hard to find solutions to this. Obviously, the top-down algorithmic method is a really big problem. And there's been some encouraging developments recently with sites starting to move away a little bit from that. It was a very controversial takeover, but I know when Elon Musk bought X, he tried to, or bought Twitter, he tried to make some changes in that. I haven't seen a whole lot of improvement over there, but especially on our site, we try to promote the opposite of that. We try to take the best content and ensure a level playing field and promote all of it. And additionally, one thing that's an issue that you may not have touched on, but you're very well familiar with, is that these sites also tend to segment you into one specific political category, right? Like, oh, this person is, a right conservative, or oh, this person is a, progressive. And so they tend to silo you off and really only show you this one category of content. They don't expose you to content from the other side, right? And so that kind of builds an echo chamber. And frankly, I think that not being able to see what's going on or on the other side, and the research bears this out, that if you don't know what's going on the other side and you're not exposed to content from a diverse set of viewpoints, your own mind will become kind of, I don't want to say entrapped, but really, really stuck in that mindset. And that is also a huge contributor to polarization.
Yeah. No, it makes total sense. So if we want to think about how to fix it, though, like this is where I think a lot of people, myself included, start to get frustrated, because sort of what happened. So we've been talking all about social media and media in general on here, right? And how that's kind of led to polarization. Those social media companies, and we could say, Google, Facebook, Twitter, any of these companies, they are massive now. And so it's like we almost realized that this was a problem too late, because now they're, and it's never too late, but too late in the sense that now they're at a point where they have so much money and they pay for so much lobbying in DC to protect their interests so that they can continue to make a lot of money. It almost seems like the way to fix this issue is some sort of regulation on those companies so that this can't happen anymore, this polarization. I don't know what that regulation would look like. Time blocking the amount of time that people can actually be on social media, or changing of the algorithms, or choose your own algorithm, and they give you several examples and descriptions of algorithms and you choose the one that you want as a user. I mean, there's any number of ways, but the only way to actually push that through would be some sort of regulation, I think. And I just don't know how that happens when none of these companies want that regulation, because they want to spend all their insanely huge profits on just continuing to have whatever freedom and power they want. Are you on the same page with that? What do you think?
Yeah, that's completely right. I mean, the fact that all these companies are so entrenched now and, lobbying the government, it's almost like yeah, as you said, it can feel like it's too late to fix it. But at the same time, as you said, it's never too late to fix it, right? But, I don't want to kid anybody. This is going to be a long, like potentially decade or two long issue if it ends up, if we end up being able to fix it. And it's going to require radical solutions and big changes in how we consume media and interact online. It really is. I'm under no illusions that we as a platform in general can solve this, right? No matter how good we're doing, and even if we become the number one source of media, it's going to take a diverse set of solutions and from all over the place to fix this. I, in general, like to think of things about incentives, right? So, how are people incentivized to do things a certain way? Because if you're incentivized to do something a certain way, that status quo will continue. But if we can change the incentives and make it so that a new way is incentivized, well, that change will actually happen quite quickly, and radical change can be affected that way. A very popular example that everybody knows is, right, subsidizing clean power, right? Everybody, you said for, right, 20 years ago that, oh, well, solar panels and wind are always too expensive. They'll never be a big factor. And right, so the way that was made into a factor, and now that stuff is actually viable on its own, right? It's the technology has improved so much that it's economically viable. But to get over that cliff and to get it really started, there was kind of a subsidization process. So as you mentioned, there could be things like changing regulations. So social media companies have to offer more algorithms. I tend to be more on the entrepreneurship side as to what can smart people create to solve this issue. One thing that I particularly admire, I don't agree with everything or a lot of the things that Elon Musk has done since he took over Twitter, but one really, I think, innovative and feature that people should take note of is community notes, right? Not only is the algorithm for that transparent, but the method of being able to, almost fact check in real time through the community and provide context and provide the other side's perspective on posts is really smart. And those kinds of things are going to be needed, right? A lot of different ones, but those kinds of things, I think, actually will have the greatest effect on reducing this. But you're right. If we really want to get over this cliff, we might need some sort of government action to say that, okay, social media companies, you have to have algorithmic transparency and you have to allow people to choose different ones. But at the same time, as easy as it is to blame Google and the social media companies, even though I think they're the major cause, there's still a lot of other sources that contribute to it, right? Like mainstream news and other fringe groups online. So there's got to be a lot of all-encompassing solutions to really make a dent in this. And we're trying to do our part, but it's going to take a lot of other really smart people, I think, stepping up and building stuff to make this better. And I think in the future, governmental change could really accelerate this and bring us a better political environment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we've been talking all about like media right now, and social media specifically, and how that has led to polarization. And, social media is so addictive, which I think is part of the problem. And, you bring up tax subsidies or tax penalties earlier. I mean, there's another highly addictive thing in our history where we then started to penalize it with the sin tax, right? And that is cigarettes.
Right.
And so there's a very, simple example that we can recall from just a couple decades ago that I think worked pretty well. I mean, there's still people who smoke, of course, and as Americans, we want to be free to smoke if we want. But the number of people who do went way down because the price of it went up. And I don't know, probably those companies have to also pay some sort of extra tax. And I mean, their profit margins probably went down, although I know they're highly profitable companies because they sell pieces of paper for like $20. But if we even step away from social media for a second and we think about, one of the things RFK has been talking a lot about is, I guess, make America healthy again is what he's calling it. And so it's this idea of there's all this crap food that we eat that is arguably as deadly as cigarettes, if you eat crappy food forever. And I mean, I remember, gosh, when I was in my 20s, I would like sometimes just go years without being on any sort of health insurance because I'm a healthy person. And it just really pissed me off to be paying a monthly premium knowing that I wouldn't actually use any of it. And all I was doing was subsidizing people who were not choosing to not be healthy. And I also remember this story of when Michelle Obama was working on trying to get school lunches to be healthier in public schools, and she was pushing this whole agenda forward, and it was to get more fruits and vegetables in school lunches. And one of the things that happened because Big Food lobbied so hard, they somehow got it approved that pizza was labeled as a vegetable because it had tomato sauce on it. And so they could
I remember that
continue.
too.
Yeah, so they could continue to push pizza. So, when I talk about the special interests and how social media has so much money and they're, putting it towards lobbying and all this stuff, there's other massive, industries that do the same thing. And that's what takes us into a bad place as a country, I think. And so it's like the intersection of having a capitalist society and having the government that we have, those two things, when they work really well together, they work really well together. And when they work poorly together, it's like massive corruption that leads to addiction and death. And I mean, it's crazy. And that's another area where it's like, God, I don't even know how to fix that because of how much money some of these massive industries have been able to amass.
Yeah, it's funny, huh? How this kind of government corporate capture seems to appear in almost every big problem in the U.S. right now. Some would call it lobbying. Some people would call it corruption. What everybody calls it is up to them. But I think that's really interesting that tends to underlie a lot of things. And frankly, I'm a little surprised that we haven't seen a little more right and left unification on getting this issue solved, because obviously the big money corporate, types don't want to solve this, but the average everyday American, whether you're left or right, really should have interest, right? Because the left is interested in making government work more efficiently for people, right? And being more of a friendly thing and helping people and being a humanitarian. And obviously big corporations hoovering up all this and skyrocketing rent prices, buying up housing stock, and overall making the upper and lower class stratification even worse, that's against their interests. And I'm surprised that we haven't seen a little more pushback. We're seeing pushback on the left from this corporate lobbying and consolidation, obviously, right? Citizens United, enraged almost every single Democrat. And, I think rightly so for them. I'm surprised we haven't seen a little more unification on the right to also fight this issue, right? Because most people on the right are very, pro entrepreneurship, pro free market, pro freedom. And this corporate consolidation also infringes on that, being able to lobby the government and make these big decisions without any democratic input and craft regulations that benefit them at the expense of freedom from citizens, right? That should unite people on the right too. So I'll be honest, I'm not sure exactly why we haven't seen that. Maybe there's just too much corporate money going around for that to ever happen. But I genuinely think this is an issue that the whole American grassroots political sphere should be able to unite upon and, work on solving and getting money out of politics.
Yeah, I agree. Somehow it has to happen. And I I don't know. I feel like there's so many, when you look at any problem, there's so many creative, solutions that you could come up with. I think we all know, the really big corporations that sort of engage in a lot of this capture. They're filled with a lot of people who are self-interested, just like everybody else out there. And, they found a treasure chest in what they're doing. And then we learned that it's actually not very good for the American people, but they don't want to give it up because they've got families to support and everything too. So they protect it like hell. And so I don't know, some sort of creative solution where there's like an off ramp for those people so that they're not, screwed, but so that we save the rest of the country. You'd think something like that would be helpful. Um,
That's a
I want
that's a
to,
great point because I just want to expound. I think you hit on a
yeah, yeah,
really great point there because people tend to also a kind of a after effect of this partisanship and division is people. I've noticed that people tend to view things more black and white now than they do in the past, and there've been some studies on this as well. So people tend to see like an either or thing, like, oh, either these rich fat cats, right, that are against my interests succeed, or and they crush us, or we succeed and we crush them. But I think in order to really make a dent in this, like you said, there's got to be some sort of off ramp. There's got to be some sort of humanization. Like, hey, these people are humans too, and what they're doing might not be good, but they're not necessarily doing it because they have bad intentions. So I think definitely coming up with some kind of economic off ramp to kind of ending these things is it's going to be really difficult. But like I was talking about before with incentives, I don't really see it ending any other way.
yeah. So last topic I want to hit on here because it I think has a lot to do with what you're doing. I mean, where you're building a business that is really centered around news and information sharing and that sort of thing. So I was watching football this past weekend, okay, and there were some political ads
NFL
that
or
came on.
college?
NFL, and
Nice.
and
I was watching the Dolphins lose a heartbreaker too. That was a tough game.
yeah, um, there was a political ad that came on for Kamala Harris, and then one later that came on for Trump, and I swear both of the ads were just blatantly lying about the other candidate. And, I think that's maybe not super uncommon with political ads. You're sort of, you're trying to like, rake them through the mud or whatever the term is. But it's not just those ads. It's like anything you listen to at any point. It seems like there's a lot of blatant lying. And, I know the left, I would say probably tends to grab onto that like misinformation, disinformation, term that they've sort of created. But
Hmm.
really both sides are engaging in blatant lying. Whatever
Oh yeah.
name you want to give to it, they're both blatantly lying quite often. How are we going to deal with that? How do you think about it? As you're building your business around information sharing and that sort of thing, how are you going to sort of try to combat that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a huge problem. Referencing like the political ads and toxicity in general. That always makes me think of something my grandma tells me almost every time I go to visit her when we get into politics and discussing it. And she's like, politics used to be so much more civil. People used to focus on the issues instead of attacking each other. And I don't know how much of that is her hindsight, her kind of rose-tinted glasses, past bias, but she's not wrong. And the research shows that political ads and speeches and everything are much more attacks than substance as they used to be. But yeah, you've hit I think you've hit every single big issue that we're facing as a business coming up. How do you ensure that you produce content that is engaging while actually making it factual and somewhat grounded in truth? Because frankly, if we went out and just allowed people to spin egregious lies that were really captivating and engaging, we would probably get more viewers on our site, right? Being honest, because that's what sells. And that's what, going back to it again, that's what is incentivized in this media landscape. And there's really no one solution to this. I think for some platforms, like on X, the community notes feature is really good because you can see if somebody is saying something that's blatantly untrue, it mentions right there. For us with live video, it's a little bit tougher, right? Because to get that real time interaction, I can't reveal too much about it, but we do have some kind of we do have some cool machine learning powered features coming in where I wouldn't say real time fact checks, but they allow real time context depending on what somebody's talking about. And we're not going to debut those in a month because they're a month or two because they're very complex. But we're working on some stuff like that. But I agree, this is probably a huge issue. I think one way we're getting around this right now is by vetting people that put out quality political content. We can't ensure that they won't lie. And to be frank, a big problem of this true too is not necessarily that most of these people aren't blatantly, lying about things. It said, hey, they heard this from a friend or they saw this on
Mm,
Facebook, these rumors that are spread around and they genuinely believe like, oh, that's true. You know, I,
mhm.
I, I mean, heck, I think I saw one a few days ago about like, Trump has been shot a third time. And, there's a little controversy about whether somebody was getting close to him with a gun, but that's just blatantly untrue, right? But I saw
Yeah.
some people that otherwise would, you know, more like kind of put it through a filter. Wait, is this really true? Just, boom, immediately resharing that. So it's a complex issue just because not everybody is intentionally saying false things. So for us, it's like, how do you weed out what's intentional and what's not? Obviously, if you're
Mm,
intentionally being a bad actor and spreading lies, our platform's not the place for you, honestly. But I think most of it is coming from that unintentionality. So how do you solve that? Well, for us, we think it's technology, right? There's this advent of, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but the advent of AI, if you want to call it that, or at least LLMs and machine learning, has made this kind of real time context possible. So we think that's the solution, and that's kind of where our business is headed. We don't want to profit off of lies and disinformation, but at the same time, we want to promote free expression so much that it contributes to a productive political conversation. Because just to go off, I don't want to go off too much, but what streamers told us coming from these other big platforms like YouTube or Twitch is that these places tend to censor people from all political sides. They don't care, and they will take down stuff arbitrarily. And it was really hurting their channels, the fact that, hey, like, this video was getting taken down for absolutely no reason. You gave me no context. So we want to be able to allow people to say things, but definitely maintain a healthy conversation and provide context where we can, to understand that viewers, when somebody says something, hey, there's two sides of this. And we also recommend, we've also got some other like more basic features, like recommending different videos below what you're currently watching about the same topic, so you can get both sides and compare and contrast for themselves. Because to kind of wrap this point up, I think people are genuinely smart at figuring out what is true and what is not, right? When you watch a Kamala or a Trump ad on TV that's attacking the other person, you can intrinsically tell, like, oh, this isn't entirely true. Like, that just didn't happen. And so we think
Yeah.
people are smart. If you give them the context, they can figure out, what's true, what's not.
Yeah. Makes sense. Awesome. Well, Beckton, thank you so much again for coming on. Very excited to have you on. Are you doing like a watch party next week for the election? What are you doing?
Yeah, so I don't know when this is going to come out, but we're having a big kind of left, right, center election night. We're featuring some of our best creators, from left, right, and center. We're going to have the perspectives next to each other, so people can see all that. And yeah, if everybody goes to politics.tv, Politiix, so politics with an X.tv, we'll have election night coverage. And frankly, one thing we didn't have enough time, but I know there's a lot of hullabaloo this year about the election not even being decided maybe for a week after. We're going to have election night, and then we're going to have that whole process live streamed
Mm,
through the whole way. So we'd encourage people to check us out. We're still in beta. We're adding great new features and great new streamers all the time. And yeah, I'm really excited to see where the election goes. Hopefully it goes somewhere healthy, and we don't have another repeat of 2020, no matter what side you're on. I think that was unfortunate. So, but it's never been a more exciting time to be in politics.
absolutely. Totally agree. Cool. Beckton, well, thank you again. We will, and we'll link to politics.tv as well in the show notes here. And again, thanks, man. Great talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Nico. You raised some really great points. It was a wonderful conversation.